So, you've probably heard of the World Economic Forum's big winter meeting in Davos, right? But what a lot of people don't know about is its counterpart, Summer Davos, in China. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and unpack what the world's next generation of leaders were talking about based on some deep analysis from the conference.
And this quote from BlackRock CEO Larry Fink really sets the tone. It perfectly captures a major theme that was humming in the background of the whole event, this deep conflict between a chaotic, uncertain world and this powerful, almost desperate, desire for control and certainty. This tension was everywhere.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. First, we'll set the scene and get the vibe of this very unique conference. Then, we're diving straight into the biggest debates that happened. After that, we'll look at what they're calling globalization's second draft. And finally, we'll tie it all together and see what it means for our very uncertain future. To really get what was going on, you have to understand the atmosphere this year. It wasn't just another meeting. We're talking about an organization and, frankly, a world that feels like it's at a major turning point.
Now, this is a really key difference you have to grasp. Summer Davos isn't for the current presidents and prime ministers you see in the news. It's where the WEF grooms its new champions, aka the people they see as the next generation of global leaders. And that makes it a really fascinating place to see which way the wind is blowing for the future.
Yeah, you could really feel the uncertainty in the room this year. For one, the WEF itself is changing, with its famous founder Klaus Schwab stepping down. But more than that, you had all these speakers tiptoeing around this new reality. The world is splitting into two camps, basically, one led by the US and one by China.
To make this whole complex geopolitical mess super simple, here's a great analogy. Just picture a high school cafeteria. The US and China are the two big rival cliques. They've set up their own tables, and now every other country is feeling the pressure to pick a side. It's a simple image, but it really nails the dilemma everyone is facing.
So, with that scene set, let's get into the core debates. We're going to dig into two of the heaviest topics they tackled, the growing risk of a major war and the mind-blowing future of technology.
So, a huge concept that kept popping up was this thing called the Thucydides trap. It sounds complicated, but it's a really simple and powerful idea from history. It basically describes the incredibly dangerous situation we're seeing right now with a rising power, China, challenging an established one, the United States.
And get this isn't just some abstract theory. A Harvard study they cited found that over the last 500 years, this exact situation has happened 16 times before. And in 12 of those cases, it ended in war. That's a 75% chance. The stakes are just unbelievably high.
Now, you would think that tech sessions would be all about AI, right? But what's fascinating is that the focus really shifted to biotechnology. And we're not talking about small advancements. Panelists were discussing some truly wild, almost dystopian stuff, like drugs that live inside you forever, and internal sensors that could, say, talk to your car.
And this brings us to a huge knowledge gap. I mean, they're talking about all this powerful, potentially world-changing tech, but the big question that was just left hanging in the air was, where are the rules? What are the ethical guidelines for this stuff? That conversation seemed to be almost completely missing.
So, how do all these big ideas about conflict and tech actually trickle down into things like money, jobs, and power? Well, let's unpack what they were calling the second draft of globalization.
On paper, this second draft of globalization sounds great. The theory is all about empowering workers and building public infrastructure. But in practice, the actual conversations were about using AI to train cheaper labor overseas to replace more expensive workers back home, and building private infrastructure that big asset managers can make money from. A pretty stark difference.
This whole shift in global power naturally leads to one of the biggest economic questions of our lifetime. And it was a really hot topic at the conference. Is the US dollar's time as the world's top currency coming to an end?
To get your head around this de-dollarization debate, here's that second analogy. The real challenge for countries like China isn't about replacing the dollar itself, which is like the world's shared language. The real goal is to build a totally new, independent phone network, a separate payment system, so they don't have to use the one controlled by the US.
But for all that talk, a lot of people pointed out some pretty fundamental reasons why the dollar probably isn't going anywhere fast. I mean, trillions of dollars in global debt is priced in USD, there's a huge demand for dollar-based crypto, and China's currency just isn't open enough yet to really compete on a global scale. And that leads to another key knowledge gap. People mention alternatives, like a payment system for the BRICS countries, but a huge question was left unanswered. How would it actually work?
What are the massive practical hurdles it would have to overcome to even get off the ground?
All right, let's bring all this home. What is the big takeaway from all these high-level talks? Let's connect the dots and see what this incredibly uncertain future could actually mean for all of us.
You know, if you had to boil the entire conference down to a single sentence, it would be this. The world is changing and fast, but nobody, not even the so-called experts at Summer Davos, has a clear map of where we're headed. The overwhelming feeling was one of deep, deep unpredictability.
But even with all this uncertainty, the WEF is still very focused on its 2030 agenda. And it's interesting to remember, this is actually a reboot. The original goals were for 2015, but they were missed, mostly because of the 2008 financial crisis. So now, 2030 is the new target date for things like digital IDs and central bank digital currencies.
And this brings us to the final, critical question. It feels like we might be heading for another period of major economic trouble. So will the next crisis blow these big global plans off course, just like it did in 2008? Or could a crisis be the very excuse needed to accelerate them and push them through even faster? That's the real billion-dollar question.